So on Twitter the other day, or X, I still call it Twitter, right after the Academy Awards, I posted a tweet about Sean Baker. So the guy who made Tangerine that was shot on an iPhone now has more Oscars than Steven Spielberg, Martin Scorsese, Quentin Tarantino, and many others. Don't wait to create. Just get out there and make your movie. You never know what can happen. And that is very true. It's been true for a long time, and it's even more true today. And on my iPhoneographer's YouTube channel, I've made a couple of videos recently about why you should or should not make a movie. They were really more, well, part of it was technical reasons, and the other part was more pragmatic reasons, the reasons to make a film, not the reasons not to. The not to were more, again, technical problems. But if you want to check those out, I'll link those in the description of this podcast episode. But the bigger point is getting out there and making it happen if you really want it. And not only was Sean Baker and Anora really awarded at the Academy Awards, but Brady Corbet's movie, The Brutalist, also won. And that was pretty inspiring as well. His movie, The Brutalist, is a $10 million movie, and Anora is a $6 million movie, which in Hollywood terms is nothing. It's micro budget to them. To indie filmmakers, that's still a lot of money. And that's one thing I want to talk about in this episode, besides the fact of just getting out there and making it happen. And then I also want to touch on the fact that there's been a lot of reports, and it's because of Brady Corbet going on a podcast and saying he was broke, about how filmmakers, Academy Award nominated and winning filmmakers aren't getting paid. And I think that's a little bit, it's true to my understanding, but it's also blown out of proportion a little bit. And then I'll give an update on my movie, Casey Makes a Mixtape, which I had hoped by now would be out into the world. I'm recording this in March 2025. It could have been out in the world, but it's not just yet because we have some different distribution offers that I just am not super happy with. And so it's taking longer than I had hoped. And again, I'll talk about that later in this episode as well. So a lot to do with indie filmmaking, micro-budget filmmaking, and just the idea behind indie film is very relevant today, but it's still very hard to make a living doing it. Today we've got another episode of Almost Professional, the podcast about mobile filmmaking, indie filmmaking, DIY filmmaking, really all things filmmaking. And today, Academy Award-winning filmmaking? Yeah, sorta. Indie filmmaking, whatever indie filmmaking is, let's talk about it. All right, so Sean Baker and Anora first. Let's talk about him. And he made a movie called Tangerine back in 2015, shot it on the iPhone 5S, I believe, which compared to today's iPhones is really not a good iPhone. But the one thing he did that's pretty interesting, and I just watched his Variety interview, Directors on Directors, which was with him and Brady Corbet. They transferred that movie to 35 millimeter film. Now that doesn't make it look like it was shot on film, but it really gives it a more filmic look. I think he did it for archival reasons because film is still the best archive. It'll last 50 to 100 years easily when digital formats, they change all the time. But the point being is he shot that on a phone and it did well. I don't remember if it was an award-winning film at Sundance. I don't know that it did well out in the general population. It's basically a movie about prostitutes, and he likes to cover those more taboo topics. I mean, obviously, Anora is about a sex worker, as he likes to call it. But his in-between movie was called Red Rocket, and then he also did The Florida Project. The Florida Project was probably his most mainstream movie before Anora. Anora is, if you haven't seen it, I'm not going to spoil it. I would call it a crowd pleaser in quotes. I'm not a huge fan of the movie. I'm kind of take it or leave it. I appreciate it for what he was trying to do. It didn't 100% work for me, but I'm not reviewing the movie. It's more about getting the movie made that I'm impressed with. And again, for low money. But is it really low money? That's really another topic. But when you compare it to Hollywood, sure, a $6 million movie is nothing. But when you compare it to true independent film, it's a lot. I mean, true independent film is what most indie filmmakers work in, and that's under $1 million. And really, it's under $200,000. And truthfully, it's probably under $100,000 budgets, honestly. The movie like Anora or Brutalist that get made for $6 or $10 million, even if they don't get Academy Awards nominations like these did that really raised their profile, those are few and far between. The movies themselves get made, but usually what I would call those movies are indie wood movies. And so The Brutalist is $10 million, yeah, but it stars Adrian Brody and Guy Pearce, and then Brady Corbet wasn't really a household name, and he probably still isn't, but he had done 2 or 3 other movies, and he was a child actor. And most indie filmmakers don't have those kind of connections or don't have those kind of budgets. And so there's this whole ecosystem almost of what I, again, call true indie film. And these films, some of them play festivals, but a lot of them don't. There's different levels of indie film, in my opinion. And they're all worthy in their own right. But the type of indie film that Anora is, that the general public hears about, is the highest echelon of the highest echelon, the A24 or the Neon type films. And again, a lot of those, I don't consider those true indies. They are in the basic definition of an independent film, meaning it's financed outside the studio system. That's really what an indie film is. And so if you really break it down, then Star Wars episode, whatever that was, the prequels that George Lucas financed himself, that would be considered an indie film under that definition. Obviously, it really isn't, but that is the definition that a lot of people use for indie film. So most indie film that I've been involved with, or most indie film that gets done in the true indie space, is all done through private equity. You ask your mom, your family, your friends, business acquaintances to buy $5,000 shares. You try to raise like $100,000 with 20 people investing. But most of these other films that are like these, the way they're done, it's probably not private equity. It probably has some private equity, but they're done through bank loans and different pre-sales and just different ways, tax rebates and all that kind of stuff that you finance independent film. Now, Anora was shot here in the U.S., in New York, and then The Brutalist, I believe, was shot in Hungary. And so they probably got some much better deals over there. And what's really interesting is that The Brutalist was shot, and if you've seen that movie, it is epic. When I say $10 million isn't low budget, I don't believe it's low budget. I think it's a good budget. But when you watch that movie compared to like a Hollywood film, they really did a lot with that budget. Anora, on the other hand, $6 million, I don't know, man. There's no visual effects in that movie. Sure, they shot in Vegas. They had to, move around quite a bit. No big names in that movie at all. I don't know where $6 million went. I will say they shot for, I maybe have this wrong, but I believe they shot for 37 days on Anora. And then The Brutalist, I think they only shot for 32 days. If you do that math, you're like, whoa, those two movies shot about the same time. That is pretty crazy. That really shows what Brady did, what Corbet did on that movie. He really, really did well as far as stretching his budget. But again, I think $10 million and $6 million for those kind of movies that are low visual effect movies, I think that's a lot of money. Now, again, I'm looking at it from an indie filmmaker's perspective. I don't know why you need 20, 40, 50 people on a crew. I really don't get it. I know why Hollywood does it. I know why big budget movies do it. But lower budget movies, I don't really get. And I know Sean Baker had some issues. He was originally going under the radar and not doing the crew as a union shoot. And usually you can get away with that, and especially in right to work states. But in New York, that would be pretty tough. I've always heard anything over $1 million, you're going to get Teamsters or the various unions involved. I'm not talking about actors. Actors are almost always involved. Even my movie, Casey Mix Mixtape, we use SAG actors, but our crew was non-union. Of course, our budget was minuscule compared to these. I mean, it's truly micro budget. But it's just interesting how the definition of an indie film or low budget film is relative to where you are. Again, it's absolutely low budget in Hollywood eyes, but to general filmmakers that make indie films, those are big budgets. They are big budgets. But you have to sacrifice. Like on my film, we had about a 10-person crew, sometimes 12, depending on the day. And, you can make a movie for that. I know Ed Burns does that now too. I really like his mentality or his approach to filmmaking. Sean Baker is the same way, but now that he's done Academy Awards and as you do bigger movies, you're almost forced to do bigger crews. And he was forced to do the Union crew in New York, which I know his style of filmmaking probably doesn't really lend itself to that. He's kind of a run and gun guy, the way I understand it. I have no connection to him. And that leads me to the idea that these guys are broke. And I don't believe that at all. I think that is some Hollywood marketing or Academy Awards marketing. What I think happened there, and I have no connection to it, but I have an inkling of an idea how movies are made at that level. When you hear that they didn't make any money on their movies, it's because these movies take 2, 3, I think Brady said his movie took up to 10 years, but I think he was probably, that includes scripting, he's probably talking 2 or 3 years of production, post, and then marketing, promoting the film. And that is where his comment came out in regards to promoting the film. But what they do is, let's say on a $10 million movie, let's say the director would normally make, I don't know, $200K, maybe $300K. What'll happen is, number one, that's a nice living for 1 year if that's all it takes you. But you spread that over 3 years, and after you pay your manager and your agent and then taxes and all that, that's not that much money. You're down to what, 200, 150K. And then what will often happen, and this may have happened on both their films, is the producer or the financiers will say, hey, to get these different scenes or to get these different shots, we need you to put your money back into the movie. And so then you become a back-end investor, so to speak, or a back-end participant. And on a lot of movies, depending on the project and depending on the budget, you may never get that money back. And so when you hear that they're broke or that they're not making money, I think that's what it means. It means they either put their salary back into the film, or it's that they were paid. On a $6 million movie, it may not have been that much, maybe 100K, I don't know. Every deal is different. Sometimes directors get a percentage of the budget, just like producers. They may get anywhere from 2 to 5%, I think, in that range. But often you just want to make the movie, and so you put it back into the film. Or again, you get 100K, but you're asked to live on that for 2 or 3 years because you're making that movie the whole time. The director, especially, but the producer too, and in those cases, they were both the producer and director on those films. You're there from the beginning. You're there at the scripting, you're there in pre-production, you're there during the shoot, and then you're there in post. And most movies take minimum 6 months, but up to a year to post. And so then you go on the promotional tour that can take 6 months to a year, especially at their level doing Academy Award stuff. So I can see where they don't have any income during that time. And Sean Baker said in that Directors on Directors interview that he can only work on one project at a time. He can't be juggling projects. He likes just a singular vision. And I did hear that Brady mentioned that he went and directed a couple commercials to make some money. But I'm sure now those guys will have all kinds of opportunities if they want to take them. But really, they strike me as true artists. I don't think you're going to see either one of those guys going and directing any kind of Disney movie or a Marvel movie anytime soon or anything like that. It would be interesting if they went and directed some prestige TV maybe, although I think Sean Baker said he had the opportunity to do that during the pandemic and he turned it down. Again, these guys like to do what they do. Their movies, they want to have control to the best of their ability. And for the most part, they did. And so while they're probably not making the money they want to make and maybe the money they deserve, I don't think they're actually broke. I think that's hyperbole. But, it is true that a lot of filmmakers, myself included, on my movie, again, much smaller level, we're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars or less, not millions. But I don't pay myself in my movies either. Any movie I've done one feature film where I got paid as a director, and I was a director for hire. And then I was a back-end participant as well, but I never made any back-end. So the director fee was all I got. And I was on that movie for about a year and a half, and it was a very small director fee. But typically speaking, you are at this level, the under 500,000, $200,000-$300,000 level movies or less. A lot of movies now, you'll see the guys making movies that go directly to Tubi. They're spending $5K, $20K, maybe upwards of $50K. They're obviously not paying themselves. They're hoping on the back end that they make a little bit of money. But again, it's just relative to your area that you work in. Again, there's true indies under 100,000. There's the indie woods that are up to 10 million. And then of course, beyond that, there are action films and such that get made for a lot more than that, 20, 50 million that are independent. But that's not the type of independent film that I'm referring to. And then there's this other thing where some people call indie film just films that aren't mainstream topics, that are more art house, and they call that indie film. I mean, I get that, but really that is a different thing. I mean, indie film is just, it's not a genre per se. Sometimes it gets lumped into that. You think of an A24 film as an indie film, as a genre, but it's really not. Because A24 releases action type films like Civil War, and they release very small movies as well, dark comedies, some horror films, etc. And so there's a wide gamut. And horror films, by the way, are one of the number one type of indie films that get made, because usually you can, with no names, etc., make a little bit of an ROI on those kind of films. But I digress here. My main point is Sean Baker, who originally shot a movie on an iPhone, Tangerine, back in 2015. And when I was really involved with Filmic Pro, doing a lot of videos and working with them before they got bought, they had their film festival. And I believe Sean Baker was a judge during the Filmic Pro Film Festival. Again, I never met him. And Steven Soderbergh was too, I'm pretty sure, because he made a couple movies on iPhone. But the point is, an Academy Award-winning director just 10 years ago, which isn't that long ago, shot a movie on a phone. And so if you are thinking about making a movie and you have no resources and no money, like most indie filmmakers, there's no reason not to use your phone and give it a go. That's really my main point I want to get through. And then no matter what level you're at, you really never have enough money or enough time. A couple friends of mine have done some studio work, and they started out as indie, and they still do indie. I'm mainly talking about a guy named David Lowery and his producing partner, Toby Hallbrooks. Even at that level, Disney-type stuff, they still have the same problems as indie filmmakers. They're getting paid, and that's a different thing. But as far as running out of time and not having enough money to do this shot or that shot, so that really never changes. So the approach is the same, whether you're shooting on a phone or on 35 millimeter or an Arri Alexa, or like I did, I shot on a Red Komodo on my movie. But in the end, it just comes down to making a good movie and hopefully building an audience and marketing yourself, etc. But money does help. Don't get me wrong. Money does help. All right, and a quick update on my movie, Casey Makes a Mixtape. I mentioned at the beginning that we are still working out our distribution, and we are. And by the way, I shot my movie on a Red Komodo, as I just said, but also an iPhone. Used an iPhone a lot for insert shots and macro. Didn't shoot the whole movie in an iPhone. But really, in the end, it doesn't matter what you shoot on, in my humble opinion, especially for lower budget indie stuff. It's about getting it made. But mine is a period piece, and so I just felt like shooting with a bigger traditional camera was the right call, because I did a lot of film look to it in the end. And so I just thought using a higher end format was appropriate. One day I might shoot a movie on an iPhone, though. I've been considering it now for a while, even though I've got the devil on this side and the angel on this shoulder telling me, yeah, do it. No, don't do it. It's any camera has pros and cons. But anyway, our distribution, I could have put the movie out last fall. I had a couple offers, and I thought I was going to with one company. But as often happens as you're doing negotiations, or certain things you don't like, and in the end, you want to pick the right distributor. There's just horror stories out there of distributors taking on a movie and then you never see any money back. And right now I'm actually weighing, I've got one distributor that is a little more high profile. And so I think if I went with them, there's a good chance we could get on a higher profile streaming outlet or platform, like a Hulu or Paramount Plus or even Netflix or whatever, even though, just as a side note, a lot of those deals are good for filmmakers and can be prestigious, but they don't necessarily make you a lot of money. And that's part of the debate. Hypothetically speaking, let's say you get a a streaming deal with Hulu and they pay you $50,000, but that is for like a 2-year deal. Again, I'm making these numbers up, but they're not a lot of money these days. They could be, I think for smaller films, you could get lucky and maybe get $100K, but it could be anywhere from, $10K, $20K, $50K. And then again, the term is different too, depending on every movie. Every deal is different basically. But with this one distributor, I have a better opportunity of getting on there. So we would do TVOD first. And this is, again, what I've been debating in my head. In my previous podcast, I went over some of these things as well. But just to recap, TVOD is transactional video on demand. So we would do that first. And that's like rentals and sales, which for indie films, those can be pretty low, truthfully. I mean, look at your own buying habits. Often you probably don't rent or buy movies that often unless you know the film or really are interested in it, just because we pay so much for streaming services. And then potentially on our TVOD, we could get into hotels and airlines and other outlets like that, even on cable. And I know I kind of live in a bubble because I've been a cord cutter now for like 5 years. But if you look at the stats out there, it's surprising how many people still have cable TV using whatever, Spectrum or Comcast or Xfinity. Maybe those are the same. But at any rate, we could get on there too to help generate some sales. And then phase 2 would be trying to get it on a premium streamer. And then after that run, you would go to advertising, what's called AVOD. And then in between there, we'll probably release a Blu-ray. And AVOD is like Tubi and YouTube and all the other ones in between, Roku, and then Peacock and other places as well. This movie it's an indie film, but it's not art house. It's more commercial. And so I think, we'll see, but I think there is a possibility for it to have some mainstream success if we can get the word out. It all comes down to marketing, and our marketing budget is pretty low, like most indie films. We're going to do digital ads and that kind of stuff, and we'll do social media posts, etc. And we may do some influencer marketing, hopefully get some reviews and that kind of thing. The normal, more grassroots kind of approach with a little bit of money involved. And we'll probably hire a publicist. And so a lot of different decisions to make which distributor, which distribution path we go with. And I'm narrowing it down, but I still just haven't decided. These films live with you forever. I'm still working with films I did 20 years ago. And so you want to make the right decision on where your film goes. And so I'm taking a little more time than I had originally wanted to, but I think it's the right move. And by the way, one interesting thing, since we've been shopping it even longer than I had planned, I've been tweaking the movie a little bit, and I really think I've made the movie better, which is kind of an unintended consequence, but in a good way. We did a private cast and crew screening back in December of last year, 2024. And so now this is like, 3-4 months later. And the movie will be out soon. We're going with 1 or 2 of these distributors. And I've even considered going it alone with an aggregator. And so it'll be out soon. I'm now thinking it'll probably be summer, but I got to quit saying that because every time I say something about that, it changes. In the end, being an indie filmmaker is wearing a lot of hats. And so I'm the producer, the director. And so not only is it all the production and post stuff, it's also the distribution side. And there's a lot to learn, and it changes so much. I mean, just a few years ago with DVD and Blu-ray and all that, there was a lot more options to make money. Now there's a ton of options out there. Most of them don't make you any money, or if they do, it's very small amounts, and you got to make it over time. So it's just a different mindset. And again, we're at a different playing field. There's indie film, and then there's indie film. And if you're on Facebook, if you're a filmmaker in the filmmaking groups, most of those people, again, are under $100,000 films. And a lot of them are very worthy. A lot of them don't get festival play. You'll just see them on Tubi or Amazon. And a lot of them you never even hear about, which is kind of sad, but it's just true. But in the end, it's about making something. It's about making your art. It's about telling the story you want to tell. And now with technology, whether it's an iPhone or a Red Komodo, or again, shooting on film or whatever you can do, it's a great time to be a filmmaker. Not only is it easier to make a movie from a technical perspective, it's still really hard to make a movie. And it's easy to get your movie out to the world because of all the streaming and even like YouTube, etc., the streaming platforms. But it's very hard to make money. It's very hard to be profitable. And as Sean Baker and Brady Corbet have shown, at least from their perspective, I don't know about the movies themselves. I think the movies have done okay. Hopefully they'll, reap some of those benefits, but it's hard for even those guys to make a living. So I wouldn't do anything else though. I really love being a filmmaker, but it's good to have a trust fund if you've got one. I don't. Anyway, this was kind of a rant today, and so I definitely appreciate you listening. Hope you got something out of it. And if you take anything else from this, would be just get out there and do it. I know that maybe sounds like cliche, just go do it, but it's true. Sean Baker proved it. Get out there and tell a good story, and you never know. Maybe one day you can be a broke Academy Award-winning filmmaker too. If you want to learn more about my movie, check out CaseyMixandMixtape.com. Again, it'll come out later this year. And then if you want to learn more about Anora or The Brutalist, check out that interview that Variety did, Directors on Directors. And again, I'll put that information in the show notes of this episode. Well, thanks for listening. This has been another episode of Almost Professional. I'm Blake Calhoun, and I will talk to you in the next one.